before the Supreme Court where Trump's team, his attorney, argued that a president could order the military to stage a coup and to have their political opponent assassinated and be immune from prosecution unless this theory that they were impeached and then convicted by the Senate. Do you share the view that presidents are basically above the law?
Look, Kaitlan, I think we have to be careful about imputing words into the president's attorneys that they didn't actually say. What the president's attorney said is that what the president's attorney said, Kaitlan, to be clear, is that there is a checks and balances system in our Constitution. Now, some things the president does, private acts, are liable to criminal penalties, but most of the things that the president does in their official duties, we have a system of impeachment. We have a system of checks and balances, the legislative branch that I'm a member of, the judicial branch. I did not read the president's attorneys as saying that the president could order a coup. The president's attorneys are saying that the constitutional checks and balances system would address that problem. And I think that's an important distinction.
But let me stop you right there, because I listened to this. It's John Sauer, Trump's attorney. And when he was asked by one of the justices if the president could order the military to stage a coup and would it count as an official act, meaning he couldn't be prosecuted for it, he said it would depend on the circumstances. I mean, what circumstances warrant a president ordering the military to stage a coup?
Well, first of all, he did say it depends on the circumstances, so that opens up a whole lot of avenue for context there. But more importantly, Kaitlan, he's just saying that would count as an official act.
But that's an official act in your view, too?
But could I finish the answer to the question, Kaitlan? An official act, there are a number of checks and balances in our system. There's the impeachment process. There's the budgeting authority that Congress has. There are a number of ways where Congress has a check and balance control over the President of the United States. All he's saying is that the criminal liability procedures that exist in this country don't cover the President's official acts. And by the way, how could anybody disagree with that, Kaitlan? Should Barack Obama be prosecuted for killing an American citizen via a drone strike? There are a number of examples in American history where if you apply the standard, the lawfare standard of the Biden administration against Donald Trump, it would make the presidency impossible to actually execute the law.
Yeah,
so
I know
in the name of taking down their political opponent, Kaitlan, these guys are really pushing a legal theory that I think would destroy the presidency, whether a Democrat or Republican was in charge.
Well, I don't think Jack Smith is running for office. But on what you're saying, you're basically saying that if the president orders the military to stage a coup, you believe the only remediation for that is that he can be impeached or that Congress can restrict the budget?
Well, Kaitlan, first of all, you're dealing with hypotheticals here that are completely outside the bounds of this particular situation. Donald Trump did not order a coup, despite the fact that a lot of media people say that he did on January the 6th. He encouraged people to protest peacefully. And of course, most people on January 6th did protest peacefully. What I'm saying is that you have to have some measure of liability for the official acts of presidency of the United States. And the way to create a check and balance on that system is what the Constitution prescribes here. You can't have prosecutors, many of whom, of course, are deeply embedded with the Democratic Party, trying to destroy the life of a former president who's now running for president because they think that they have a better argument for what that president should have done. You can have a political disagreement with Donald Trump, and that's totally reasonable. You shouldn't destroy the presidency in the process. Okay. And I think that's what a lot of the Biden administration Department of Justice is trying to do.
But you essentially are agreeing that the presidents should not be able to be prosecuted. Let me ask you something else, because as I mentioned, there is an open question of who Donald Trump will pick to be his vice presidential candidate. We just heard him talking about Marco Rubio. You're hosting a fundraiser with him in your home state of Ohio later this month. I know you say that you two haven't discussed the vice presidency directly, but you said you'd certainly be open to it if he did offer it to you. Considering that, does it give you any pause whatsoever about taking that job when you see how he treated his last vice president?
Well, Kaitlan, first of all, again, I haven't talked to Donald Trump about becoming vice president. I think it's important to support President Trump as Republicans because I think he was a good president. And I think that he made the country more prosperous. And I think he made the world more peaceful. What gives me pause, Kaitlan, is another 4 years of Biden's administration where he's opened the borders and where you have effectively a conflict, a major world conflict in nearly every continent in the world.
But my question was not about President Biden. It's about President Trump.
Well, look, it's fundamentally about President Biden because if you're comparing the two records of these presidents and asking, who do I want to be president? It's very clearly that I want Donald Trump to be president. And I understand that there are a lot of things that people like you disagree that he did, but I think fundamentally he was a good president. He accomplished a lot for the country. And the question fundamentally for our country is, do we want 4 more years of Joe Biden, or do we want 4 more years of the peace and prosperity of Donald Trump? That to me is an easy question.
The last time I checked, President Biden wasn't approving of the chance to hang his vice president and did not call his vice president when their life was in danger on Capitol Hill, something that Mike Pence himself has testified to. So my question is, does it give you any pause to be his vice president, given how he has treated Mike Pence?
Kaitlan, I'm extremely skeptical that Mike Pence's life was ever in danger. I think politics people like to really exaggerate things from time to time.
I think
know a
Mike
lot of
Pence
folks in
would
the
disagree
Democratic
with
Party.
that, Senator.
A lot of folks in the Democratic Party, Kaitlan, act as if January the 6th was the scariest moment of their lives. I think, look, January 6th was a bad day. It was a riot. But the idea that Donald Trump endangered anyone's lives when he told them to protest peacefully, it's just absurd. And the entire legal basis of this prosecution of Donald Trump
but they
from
were
Jack
chanting
Smith,
that they wanted to hang him.
Look, Kaitlan, did a few people say some bad things? Sure, but do we blame Donald Trump for every bad thing that's ever been said by a participant in American democracy? I think that's an absurd standard. And look, Kaitlan, I know you're worried, and I think justifiably so, about
this isn't about me,
threats
Senator.
to
I'm
American...
asking questions about you and how you would feel about this.
I'm trying to answer the question. I appreciate if you let me. We know that there are threats to American democracy. I think the biggest threat to American democracy, Kaitlan, is that the Biden administration is trying to prevent Donald Trump from campaigning and taking his case to the American people, even as they hide their own candidate.
That's presiding over that case. The Biden administration is not preventing Donald Trump from campaigning. He just did 2 campaign events tonight.
This is a really important point, Kaitlan. Who is the number 3 person from the Biden Department of Justice who went to work for the New York prosecutor just months before he brought this case against Donald Trump? You can't have people moving from the Biden administration to prosecute Donald Trump in New York and say it has nothing to do with the Biden administration, especially when the judge is the Biden administration donor.
Attorneys go from the Justice Department to local DA's offices all the time. That's not that unusual. I mean, you're an attorney, you know that.
It's pretty unusual.
You probably have colleagues who went to Yale with you that did that.
It's pretty unusual for the number 3 person in the Department of Justice to then go to the New York prosecutor's office to bring a bogus case against Donald Trump, and then to have the judge presiding over that case to be a donor to Biden-Harris. I think that's pretty unusual, Kaitlan, and really is, aside from your views or anyone else's views about Donald Trump, this is a real threat to Americans' trust in the legal system. If you look at polling, even a lot of folks who are going to vote for Joe Biden think that the lawfare against Donald Trump is bogus. We're destroying faith in the American system of law and order to try to bring down Joe Biden's political opponent. That's a threat to democracy. It's
a jury of his peers that indicted him and a jury of his peers that are in that room right now and will decide this case. Senator J.D. Vance, thank you for joining us here on The Source. Secretary Rubio for being here. We just heard from President Zelensky. He said he does not think that he owes President Trump an apology for what happened inside the Oval Office today. Do you feel otherwise?
I do, because you guys don't see, you guys only saw the end. You saw what happened today. You don't see all the things that led up to this. So let me explain. The president's been very clear. He campaigned on this. He thinks this war should have never started. He believes, and I agree, that had he been president, it never would have happened. Now here we are. He's trying to bring an end to this conflict. We've explained very clearly what our plan is here, which is we want to get the Russians to a negotiating table. We want to explore whether peace is possible. They understand this. They also understand that this agreement that was supposed to be signed today was supposed to be an agreement that binds America economically to Ukraine, which to me, as I've explained, and I think the president alluded to today, is a security guarantee in its own way, because we're involved. It's now us. It's our interests. That was all explained. That was all understood. And nonetheless, for the last 10 days, in every engagement we've had with the Ukrainians, there's been complications in getting that point across, including the public statements that President Zelensky has made. But they insisted on coming to D.C. This agreement could have been signed 5 days ago, but they insisted on coming to Washington. And there was and should have been a very clear understanding. Don't come here and create a such scenario where you're going to start lecturing us about how diplomacy isn't going to work. President Zelensky took it in that direction, and it ended in a predictable outcome as a result. It's unfortunate. That wasn't supposed to be this way, but that's the path he chose. And I think, frankly, sends his country backwards in regards to achieving peace, which is what President Trump wants at the end of the day, is for this war to end. He's been as consistent as anyone can be about what his objective is here.
But what specifically do you want to see President Zelensky apologize for?
Well, apologize for turning this thing into the fiasco for him that it became. There was no need for him to go in there and become antagonistic. Look, this thing went off the rails. You were there, I believe. It went off the rails when he said, let me ask you a question to the vice president. What kind of diplomacy are you talking about? Well, this is a serious thing. I mean, thousands of people have been killed, thousands. And he talks about all these horrible things that have happened to prisoners of war and children, all true, all bad. This is what we're dealing with here. It needs to come to an end. We are trying to bring it to an end. The way you bring it to an end is you get Russia to the table to talk. And he understands that attacking Putin, no matter how anyone may feel about him personally, forcing the president into a position where you're trying to goad him into attacking Putin, calling him names, maximalist demands about Russia having to pay for the reconstruction, all the sorts of things that you talk about in a negotiation. Well, when you start talking about that aggressively, and the president's a deal maker, he's made deals his entire life, you're not going to get people to the table. And so you start to perceive that maybe Zelensky doesn't want a peace deal. He says he does, but maybe he doesn't. And that active, open undermining of efforts to bring about peace is deeply frustrating for everyone who's been involved in communications with them leading up to today. And I think he should apologize for wasting our time for a meeting that was going to end the way it did.